If you're here, there's probably something going on with your teen or young adult that doesn't feel quite right. Maybe things have changed. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe you've been asking yourself questions you don't quite have answers to yet. At some point, most parents find themselves in the same place. What do we do now? This is that conversation.
Welcome to What Do We Do Now from AMFM Healthcare. I'm your host, Robin Lovell. If you're a parent of a teen or a young adult, you've probably found yourself asking this question more than once. Is this just a phase? Or is this something more? Maybe you're noticing changes in their mood, their behavior, how they're showing up at school or at home. Some of that can be part of growing up, but sometimes it's not that simple, and knowing the difference isn't always clear. Today, we are talking about how to think through that. I'm joined by 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐠𝐞𝐿, Vice President of Adolescent Services at AMFM Healthcare, and a licensed therapist who has spent years working directly with teens and families in residential and outpatient care. And Dr. David Rowe, a neuropsychologist who leads a nationwide assessment practice, works with families, schools, and clinicians, and teaches and supervises in child and adolescent psychology. His work focuses on helping families understand what's really going on beneath the surface and what to do next. 𝐬𝐭 and Dr. Rowe, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Really glad to be here, Robin.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. David, I want to start with what you're seeing day to day. When parents first reach out to you, what's usually been happening at home that leads them to that moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, parents today are navigating a completely different landscape than even 10 or 15 years ago. Honestly, they're navigating a different landscape than a year ago. There's identity exploration happening with their children, and it's happening in public, and it's happening in an accelerated way. Kids used to try on their identities really privately within their small peer groups, and now it's happening online in real time with reinforcement from thousands of other people. There's wild amounts of information and more importantly, misinformation that's being disseminated constantly. There's an unprecedented access to mental health information, but not all of it is accurate or developmentally appropriate. So you have these kiddos who are trying to figure out who they are. They're getting active responses in real time from peers and from non-peers, both positively and in terms of cyberbullying very negatively, all in the context of wild amounts of extraordinary misinformation. And what I see a lot of is a real rise in kind of self-diagnosis and unfortunately misdiagnosis. So we're seeing a real increase in young people identifying with labels like autism, OCD, tic disorders, dissociative identity disorders, and it's all based on social media content. And sometimes that reflects a genuine distress and a search for understanding, but that label can get ahead of the full picture. So there's a lot of complicated things happening, and I know I just spit a lot out. But we're seeing that every day, and parents don't even know how to articulate that, let alone how to actually help fix it.
Just to unpack that for a second, what I really think you named in a broad way is the use of technology and how it's shaping these kiddos' development or these young adult development. 𝐬𝐭, can you comment on what you see when these young adults or these teenagers or children really are arriving in treatment? How does what he's just described play out in a treatment setting?
Sure. So I think that to back up before they even get to us, if I can answer some of that question, the original question too, around what are parents seeing or experiencing that are having them reach out to folks either like myself or like David to get clarification, is they're seeing this shifting that's happening with their children, with their teens. Maybe the parents are the ones that are observing it, or maybe they're getting some feedback from the school or from coaches or from these other folks that spend a lot of time with the teen. Something is going on. And many times how parents describe it is like their happy-go-lucky little kid is gone. And there is this new version that has shown up, and they are so confused and baffled by what's going on and really wanting clarity, like David was saying, on is this normal teen development? Is this part of the adolescent phase? Is this identity formation? Or is there something really wrong? Is something going on here? And a lot of times parents are coming to us after they already have evidence of that. Maybe their kid is self-harming, or there's substance use going on, or they're really struggling with an eating disorder and the parents know that, and they want to understand why. So the why, many times they're going to someone like David to get those answers. And oh shoot, how do we keep our kids safe and how do we get them on a different path? Many times that's why they're coming to a residential program. That might be why they're coming to me or Mission Prep. And so to answer the second part of that question is like, what are we seeing? We're seeing teens who have kind of passed that point of normal adolescent. We might call it like angst or struggle or all of the like messiness and yuckiness that happens with adolescence, of like the constant face plants that happen with adolescents. They've gone beyond that. So like I said, there might be self-harming to the point where they can no longer stop, or their mental health struggles, depression, anxiety. They can't go to school. They can't show up for school. They're no longer doing the activities. Maybe they're really irritable. They're seeing like aggression, which looks like maybe they're getting in fights at school, or maybe they're kind of roughing up their younger siblings, or they're punching walls. And so what we're seeing once they get to us is like, there's some pretty concrete evidence. There's some behaviors. We can look historically at the past couple of months or the past couple of years and say, this is probably not getting better on its own.
So when we're seeing this happen, what do you think is the core question that these parents are asking?
I'm going to guess that it's the same for both David and me, the questions that we're getting from parents. I'll kind of name it briefly, but I'm so curious to hear from David too, what you're hearing. The core question is, what happened? How did we get here? And what I think they're not overtly asking, but what I think the underlying fear is did I cause this? This sense of like maybe guilt or shame around it, and like fear of others' judgment. But I think it's a lot of this, like, I don't know what to do, and I don't even know how to ask for help because I don't know what I'm asking for help with.
I think you said all that perfectly. Again, we have these kiddos who don't know who they are or what they want or what they're capable of, right? There's this massive amount of identity diffusion. And the reality is that's part and parcel to being a teenager. The question is this a phase or something more, right? Is this something that needs to be addressed? Is this something that somebody needs more supports, more services, more accommodations to actually help mitigate so it's not going to impact them? What is the nature of their functionality now? And the line between like a phase or something more has always been blurry, especially for teenagers. But right now, it's especially hard to see. Like adolescence is supposed to be messy. Teens have mood swings. Their identity shifts dramatically. They're really intense. And that intensity right now is amplified by all those other factors we talked about, right? We talked about technology, right? Robin, you asked about how technology impacts what we're seeing with these kids. And technology just hasn't changed what kids are exposed to. It's changed how they've developed. We're raising kids in an environment with their brains that were never designed for. There's constant input, there's constant comparison, there's no real off switch. And, childhood used to have kind of natural boundaries. Now there's no clear line between school, social life, the internet. It's all happening at once. And parents who did not grow up in that landscape are doing exactly what Asia saying, which is asking, what is happening? This is my first experience with this. I have no metric to gauge this by. So is my child okay? And the question is, how are they functioning? Just like Asia said. Is it affecting their sleep, their diet, their ability to exercise, the kind of foundational, fundamental building blocks of psychological hygiene? Are they able to be productive? Are they able to figure out who they are and what they want and what they're capable of? And oftentimes people just don't have the information. And there's so much anxiety for parents in the ambiguity. It's so vague that it causes anxiety. And then again, as Asia said, there's this kind of line about how, what is my role in this experience? Should I be minimizing it? Should I be catastrophizing it? How do I find some sort of middle ground here? How do I collect more information? And quite frankly, that's why people usually call me, because they want to go, hey, how does my kid compare, right? That angst that Asia talked about, is there anxiety in the 99th percentile, which is your major red flag clinical anxiety, or is in the 67th percentile, which is like your more standard teenage angst compared to tens of thousands of peers, right? How do we actually put an understanding, a label to their experience? Not because we're trying to, categorize them, but because we're trying to stratify them. So we're trying to understand the nature, right? The severity, the frequency, the duration of somebody's symptoms and how that might map to criteria, to how that might map to certain disorders, so we can actually help them not only feel better, but get services they might deserve or effectively find the right place for them.
I just want to share a little, David, as you were talking, and I don't know why I didn't think of this right out of the gate, but I think so many times when I'm having conversations like this, I'm coming from the lens of the clinician, the therapist, the professional, and I'm also a parent. I am a parent of a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I can give an example of why I reached out to David for my own child. I noticed that there was a shift with him. There, from second grade to third grade, there was a significant shift in, well, we started to see, honestly, right out of the gate that there were some struggles with letters and with some words and with focus. Now, my kids, they're kind of COVID kids. My daughter is 6, she's a COVID baby, and my son went through preschool and TK and kindergarten and all during COVID and the effects that maybe had. Anyway, we got to the point now where his teachers are starting to recognize, the school psychologist is starting to recognize that, hey, there's something that is showing up with him and he's really struggling. And we see it at home. We see he's really, like, academically, he's smart. If he ever sees this, you're a smart kid. And he still really struggles with like certain core, I don't know, like processing things. So I really wanted clarity. I wanted to know as a parent what's going on with my kid, because then that would give me the direction of, okay, then how do I help him? If I don't know what's actually going on, I don't know how to help him. If it is anxiety and fear and sense of failure and self-esteem issues, that's one path. If it's dyslexia or there's a processing issue, or that's another path. If it's an ADHD diagnosis, that might be another path. And so I reached out as a parent to David and said, like, hey, would you be able to possibly do an assessment with my son? I need this clarification because I know something's wrong and it's not self-correcting and I don't know what to do. As someone who has degrees in early childhood education and a clinician, as a parent, I didn't know what to do and I need help.
I think you both have just named exactly where I wanted to go in talking about what's different about teens today. You've both named COVID. You've both named the technology aspect, how that's shifting development. And I think that those things are making this all harder to read than it used to be for parents. And I wanted to ask, like, what are the things that are normal? What developmental milestones can we normalize that parents might be wondering about? Or what are some things that might feel concerning to a parent, but are still very much a part of being a teenager?
That's a great question. And 𝐬𝐭, thank you for sharing, obviously. I think that there's two questions, right? There's the content and then there's the context. So first thing you need to figure out is what the content is, right? For 𝐬𝐭 put it perfectly. Is this psychiatric? Is it have to do with mood or anxiety or some self-concept? Or is it developmental? Is it ADHD, learning disabilities, cognitive issues, processing? So we have to figure out what is primary, what is secondary, what's tertiary. Because those things can all be intertwined. If somebody's struggling with learning issues, it's going to make them feel like maybe they're not a star student. So then they start asking themselves, who am I? But once we understand what the content is, which is one of the reasons people get neuropsych testing, then we have to understand the context. And that's when we start answering the question, is that a phase or is that something more? So when I'm helping parents think through this, if I was talking to 𝐬𝐭 about this, I want to focus on kind of 4 things, right? The pattern, the duration, the intensity, the impact. And those things help us understand what is normative, what could be expected in terms of developmental milestones. So like when you're looking at the pattern of behavior, if it's a phase, we're looking for things that are inconsistent, things that come and go. If it's something more than a phase, it's going to be more of a persistent, predictable pattern. Things tend to get worse, not better, right? Same thing with duration. If it's a phase, usually for teenagers, weeks to months. If it's something more, it's going to be several months or longer. It's going to worsen over time. It's going to be amplified, and you're going to start to see the way in which it bleeds into the rest of their psyche. Same thing with intensity. If it's a phase, it's going to be distressing, but manageable. If it's something more, it's going to be overwhelming. It's going to be escalating. It's going to be extreme and acute in some capacity. And then finally, the most important is like the impact. If it's a phase, then like largely, life continues. School, friendships, family, functioning, all of it. And if it's something more, then interference really impacts the functioning. You see things like school refusal, you see things like social withdrawal, you see things like sleep disturbances, loss of interest in things, we call it anhedonia. You see things like safety concerns because the acuity really is real. Just because people are over-diagnosing themselves doesn't mean that there isn't also a hidden severity in the symptoms kids are experiencing these days. Except it's not all autism and DID. A lot of it is self-harm and suicidality. When parents are dealing with that for the first time, it's terrifying. That's why it's nice for people like 𝐬𝐭 to be able to give the real comfort and confidence to families knowing that this might be their first time, but it's certainly not hers. And that doesn't mean that the prognosis is bad.
What things do you see parents get really worried about that are actually within the range of typical development?
I can speak to that a little bit. And I think it weaves into the question before this of like, what's normal? Like what's normal?
Right, normal's a setting on the washing machine.
Totally. The first thing that came to my mind when you said that is like, well, it's a moving target. It's going to be different for, I think, generationally. Normal adolescent experience is going to look different. I think depending on like culturally, geographically where we're located, I think there's so many things that play into what is normal. But what I would say that what parents sometimes reach out to us about, or just in general, that might be kind of normal is, I had mentioned this before, this shifting from childhood into these emerging young adults. We know that there are all of these factors that impact the shifts that begin to happen, this identity formation phase that is so vital. We are going from young, dependent children. We're dependent on our caretakers. We're dependent on the adults all around us. Many times we're in a place of pleasing because that's how we get our needs met. I wish my kids would do that just a tad bit more, just a little bit more. They've learned that they can debate and disagree a lot. Anyway, so they're moving from knowing that they have to kind of many times show up in a certain way to get their needs met. And then as they're starting to go through middle school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. There's a bit of that like sweet little kid. If parents have had that sweet little kid that starts to dissolve a little bit, that's really actually important and that's developmentally appropriate to happen. But all of a sudden, opinions really start to show up. This isn't cursing, doesn't count, but it's like they're little sassholes where like everything is like, no, or like my daughter, like when she learned she actually doesn't have to do things, I'm like, oh no. But so adolescence is meant to be a phase kind of that the young child who is dependent, where teens are now, they have their own ideas. They're creating their own value systems. Some of those are going to be inherited and brought over from the family system or from the society that they're in. But many times they're looking around and they're saying, I got my own ideas about this. And parents, it's not aligned with what you have, what your ideas are. And so I think with that sometimes brings what we might name as rebellion. We might name it as rudeness. And sometimes they're kind of rude and they're kind of sassy. And during all of this, their bodies are growing, their bodies are changing. There's physical discomfort that's happening. Irritability is like, I mean, have anybody seen The Inside Out where the girl starts to become a teenager? I'm like, oh my God, that's so spot on. One, I remember that from my own adolescent experience and from working with teens day in and day out. I'm like, they nailed that. So there's so much like messiness and I think discomfort that happens in this adolescent phase that is so vital. I love Dan Siegel. I was like, I'm going to forget the guy's name, this guy that I love so much. He has this book called Brainstorm, and it talks about how risk and rebellion are also really important parts of the adolescent experience. That's how we learn. It's how we learn our capacity. It's how we learn really kind of how to build like safety around us. So a lot of what parents are like, oh, my sweet little, I'll use my son's name, my sweet little Hendrix is like talking back to me all the time. I kind of am like, well, you might have to get used to that for a little bit and like learn how to communicate what your boundaries and expectations are around that. But that some of that might be a little bit normal.
You're bringing up a really good point, and I was going to ask about what it sounds like is in this phase of development, kids are really pressure testing their parents' boundaries. And they're really pressure testing to see, how are you going to show up when I'm pushing? Is it safe for me to push?
Totally. They call it rage baiting.
Yes, this is the new term, rage baiting. Yeah. I think my 3-year-old does that to me all the time unconsciously.
I was going to say, it's not always intentional.
Right. What would we name that the parent's experience is in this? Because I know for myself, I cannot always contain my emotions when I am activated, when I am triggered, when I have all of the noise of my life, my job, my work, all that comes home with me. All that external stuff is still there, but I have to be a container and a safe place for my kid, and that's not always easy.
I think that's why normalizing expectations is so important, right? Because it really de-escalates the fear and it really de-escalates the frustration. I think you need to know, most people know to expect that their kids are going to change interests, they're going to change styles, they're going to change friend groups, they're going to explore their beliefs and their values and their labels, and that exploration is not a concern, again, unless it starts to limit and impact their functioning. But you're expecting them to have emotional intensity, to have mood swings, to have strong reactions to things, to feel things really deeply. They don't just feel emotions, they feel them at full volume all the time. They're unencumbered by geopolitical uncertainty and economic instability. They're just feeling their feelings. And you can expect that they're going to pull away from their parents, just like 𝐬𝐭 said. They want more privacy. They want less sharing. They have a much more increased peer focus. Unfortunately, oftentimes they need more support when they want support at the very least. But they're not trying to disconnect. They're just trying to reorganize their attachments, which is actually a really healthy thing. And they're going to have a lot more peer influence, right? If your child suddenly cares more about what their friends think than what you think, that's developmentally appropriate. And they're going to be very sensitive to peer feedback. They're going to have that wild desire to fit in. And that wild desire to fit in, that conformity, is going to be offset in conflict with a desire to be unique, right? Because peers become a testing ground for their identity. And that's, again, normal. There's going to be more self-focus, more what people might see as self-exploration when they're feeling generous, and complete self-absorption and self-indulgence when they're feeling maybe less generous. But there's going to be a preoccupation with their appearance, with their own thoughts, with their own feelings. They can look like narcissism, but it's just them trying to figure out who they are. And they're going to try on labels, and they're going to try out language, and they're going to use that psychological language I talked about. That doesn't automatically mean things are wrong. Everybody on the street says, I'm depressed and anxious, and what they mean is I'm sad and I'm stressed, and rightfully so. The world is a sad and stressful place. It doesn't necessarily mean what I would mean if I told someone they're depressed and anxious, which is to me they meet 5 out of 9 criteria for major depressive disorder in the DSM. But again, it's not about diagnosis. It's about trying to make sense of one's internal experience. And that's true of these, teenagers trying to figure it out. And it's also true of us. We're, as neuropsychologists, we're just trying to help somebody understand their experience. But again, more expectations, social ups and downs, friendship drama is real for kids, for adults, for everybody. They're going to feel left out. They're going to shift social groups. It's going to be painful. It's going to be part of development. They're going to learn how to navigate relationships. And that's the way it's supposed to be, messy. And again, they're going to be risk-taking. They're going to be boundary testing. They're going to argue. They're going to challenge rules. They're going to test their own independence, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. But the question isn't about whether they push. It's about how far, how often, and with what consequences. So a parent's job is to understand all of that. And with that, have clear communication, clear expectations, clear boundaries, and clear consequences. But overall consistency. That's what I would say.
That sounds so hard.
Yeah, it's an impossible task, for sure. And no one's expecting you to do it all the time.
I just keep visualizing a bowling alley and the bowling lane with the bumpers. It's like giving the kids a wide berth, but with guardrails. That's all I keep visualizing. But that sounds really hard.
Honestly, it's like a how dare you? After everything I've given to you and done for you, how ungrateful. How dare you? I think is
So feeling disrespected.
Feeling disrespected, feeling like a lack of appreciation. You don't appreciate all of the things that we've done. And I think I was just talking to a group of parents yesterday at a school, and this sense of, wait, whoa, did we do this all wrong? And I love how how you brought up, Robin, this, like, all the constant role shifts that we have, and how that everything that we navigate through as adults and our own, right? Like,
Our own human experience.
yeah. And what David was saying of, like, we want to make sure that the basic needs are met. But as parents, man, if I'm showing up hangry or under-caffeinated, over-caffeinated, it's very balanced. We got to be right in the sweet spot.
There's a fine science.
Yes. If I haven't slept well, if all of that is going to impact my capacity, my tolerance for when my kid shows up and is, like, ready to push, and many times, I think I have awareness of that, and I think I have insight, but woof, sometimes it just creeps up, and I don't react and respond in a helpful, way. I think you were kind of naming that a little bit too, Robin, of, like, there are times when it's like, I'm thinking about the emails or the things, and my capacity, my fuse is short, my capacity is short.
Yeah, my window for tolerance gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
And it feels really hard because it is really hard. I mean, parents are being asked to navigate things that they never had to experience themselves. They're being asked to make high-stake decisions with insufficient, if not incomplete, information in an environment that's constantly changing, and it's not easy. And there's this tension that parents experience. Again, the question, is this a phase or something more? I don't want to overreact, but I also don't want to miss something important, something serious. And that tension is exhausting. There's no clear roadmap, and the stakes feel incredibly high because it's your child. And when it's your child, everything feels urgent. And sometimes you will be frustrated, and sometimes you'll be deeply sympathetic, and those things can both be true. And even small changes can feel like they have a really big meaning for a family. But I don't think that, like, even feeling like it's hard is an overreaction. I think that one is emotionally responding to how much they care about the situation.
And just to touch a little bit more on that piece of how challenging parenting is, I think every generation has had parenting struggles. And I many times think about the Surgeon General's report in 2024, I believe, where the levels of, like, loneliness that parents are feeling, and burnout, and intense sense of pressure. They're feeling financial pressure. They're feeling the academic and achievement pressure to have their kids be highly achieving. As parents, we fall victim to comparison, online pressures, all the things. We now have a lot of concrete evidence to be able to look at and name. It's not just us being like, God, this is hard, right? Like, we can look and see, yeah, it's hard, and here's the evidence.
Can I also just name the fact that while we're watching our children go through this comparison and all of the things that are happening on social media for them, I would also just like to name that parents go through it too. I go through it too, where I'm comparing myself as a working mom with a career and a full-time job to moms that are stay-at-home moms. And I'm looking at what content is being put out, and I'm comparing myself as a parent to pictures I see on the internet, and that is not fair to myself. And I am aware of that, but yet I still go through the emotional experience of doing it.
100%. I mean, I experience that all the time too. What I do is I watch the content, and I'm like, I'm going to be that mom that cooks all the meals, and I buy all the ingredients, and those poor veggies, they die in the bin. They die in the bin. I feel real bad. But I think that many times what we're talking about is the stress and the pressure and how hard it is and the comparison. I think that is many times one of the barriers for parents that keep us from truly asking for help. It creates the delay of wait, everyone else seems to have it all together out there, and, like, they're doing all the things, if not more than I am, and yet look at, in all of the pictures, their kids are so happy and, like, doing the sports and doing the things. There must be something innately flawed with me, or I'm for some reason doing this wrong. I think that, I know for me, that might keep me from being like, hey, David, I think something's going on here, or reaching out to my friend group, or, making the decision to reach out to a clinician to seek some guidance or some help. This idea of like the shoulds. I think I should be able to figure it all out, or if I just did this or this or this differently, I'll be able to fix it all on my own.
I couldn't agree more. Social media makes everything one-dimensional. It like flattens complexity. It makes parenting look calm and certain and controlled when in reality it's none of those things. So all these parents are like quietly, like internally feeling like they're not doing enough, they're not doing it right, they're somehow behind everybody else. And that's coming from what they're consuming in terms of their day, not necessarily what's actually happening at home. And it creates this background noise of self-doubt. Parenting is difficult enough without debilitating self-doubt that's being fueled by these online comparative tools. And when parents feel judged, even indirectly, they're much more likely to second guess themselves and then react from a place of anxiety rather than kind of parental intuition.
And then you think about adding in the layers of, being employed, whatever dynamics are at play within the parental relationships. Are you a single parent? Are you married? Do you have, what is the word for when you have separate homes and multiple parents or step parents? Or there's all those different dynamics that can shift how we show up. I want to ask the hard question of, what are the signs that make you pause a little more as a clinician? We've kind of alluded to what might be normal developmental behavior, but what are the things that fall outside of normal that we should be concerned about?
I think that the goal of parenting, to kind of bring it back home, back to like your family system, is not to parent like anybody else, right? It's just to parent your child. It's just to understand your child. And the more you compare your parenting to anyone else's style or family or, God forbid, the internet, the further you get from your actual child. And I think that there are things that parents miss because they're too preoccupied with that comparison. I think the biggest red flag, to answer your question, is when a child's functioning starts to decline. We talked about school avoidance or school refusal, a drop in performance, again, withdrawal from friends in a prolonged, sustained way, sleep disturbances, eating disturbances. Again, you have to ask yourself, are they doing the things necessary to be a healthy person? And I think that persistence over time gets really concerning because it's not just happening, it's sticking around. And that's when it stops becoming a phase and starts to become more of a clinical issue that's escalating. Same thing with the nature of intensity. If it's more frequent distress, if it's stronger reactions, if it's less of an ability to recover, if we start having issues of distress tolerance and emotion regulation, then it indicates that they're not just struggling, that the struggle is gaining some form of momentum. And I would argue that the same thing is true of one's cognitive rigidity. Like healthy development tends to be flexible. And I get a little concerned when things start to get rigid. People start having more fixed beliefs about themselves. This is just who I am, right? Or an inability to shift their perspective or kind of that all or nothing thinking. When a child gets stuck there, that's when parents really have to lean in and start asking more questions.
All of that. David, you said that so beautifully. And I think, like, to give some specific examples of, and I feel the need to go down this route just a little bit. And this is probably being impacted by the conversations that I was having with some parents of teens yesterday, where they were like, yeah, but what specifically do I need to look for? And so I was like, okay, I can't off the top of my head think of a comprehensive list of what to look for, but like, let's dive in a little bit, right? So I would say David talked about privacy earlier. Teens want more privacy. There is a difference between a teen wanting privacy. I need alone time, I need space in my room, and the kind of like secretive sneakiness that maybe starts to show up, right? Of the like, if you're about to like walk in their room and they're like, no, don't look over there, or don't, of the like these huge reactions. But there's like, I think we have a gut instinct as parents that many times we ignore. And so if you're noticing that it has shifted from somebody asking for privacy to like sneakiness and real secrecy, that's an indicator that there might be something going on. There might be something kind of like hidden in their space or hidden in their room. And some of the things that might be hidden in their space in their room are substances or sharp objects. Self-harm is something that we are seeing at levels. I honestly, when I meet an adolescent who has any sort of mental health struggle, this might be emerging depression, emerging anxiety, I am surprised when they are not engaging in self-injurious behavior. And for the parents that might be asking, what the heck is that? Our teens, kids, even adults are actually using objects to like cut their bodies. It could be sometimes burning. Most of the time it's using like razors or even everyday objects, like breaking a pen and getting a sharp piece of the pen, or just kind of finding something and actually cutting their bodies to the point where there are injuries and maybe leaving scars. And so along that line, you might also be noticing that your teen is wearing long sleeves, or maybe they've gone from, I don't know what it is about teens. It's like 30 degrees out and they insist on wearing shorts, at all times. I'm like, how? I need the parka. But if you have a teen who like they're consistently like in their sports gear and in their shorts and and then that shifts and they're wearing sweatpants or they're wearing long sleeve shirts, that might be an indicator that something is going on, either with self-injurious behavior, self-harm, or potentially an eating disorder. A lot of times with eating disorders, one way that someone who might be restricting or someone who might be purging, one way that they might be trying to hide like a shrinking body frame is to wear baggy, bigger clothes. Or even just like discomfort in their body. And so they're going to start wearing different like non-tight fitting clothes. I would say substances. And then also something that we see a lot of is in the gaming world and community, there's kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word addiction, but certainly like a dependency. And many of these games today were like, you could spend a ton of money. Even like Roblox, I think Minecraft. And so asking parents for like, hey, can I get an advance on that allowance? Or can I, and without you really knowing what it is they're using the funds for, sometimes that might be going towards substances, and sometimes that might be going towards like some gaming, possibly addiction or overspending or whatnot. And I say all of that. And also, like a follow-up question that parents tend to have is like, but I don't want to violate their trust.
And I think you've just perfectly named a lot of things that parents might be questioning that they should be looking for. And I wonder, where do we see parents unintentionally waiting too long to step in? Or what you've just named of, I don't want to violate their trust. I don't want them to be angry with me. And so first question is, where do we see parents maybe unintentionally waiting a little too long to step in? And why do we think that is?
Yeah, I mean, parents aren't doing anything wrong. They're trying to find their footing in like a very complex situation. And they're doing what anyone would do. They're hoping that this will pass, especially when signs of impairment are already present. And it's really hard to find balance between minimizing, which is to say this is just a phase. They say it to reassure themselves. They say it to reassure their system, their children, their clinicians, teachers, any stakeholder. And sometimes they say that prematurely. Sometimes they do just the opposite, which is they overcorrect. They jump to labels. They jump to intensive interventions. They make panic-driven decisions. And that can be really difficult because the goal is to understand your child, not just to either hope for the best or just the opposite, assign a diagnosis.
So how do we stay connected when things feel tense and or uncertain? Like, we don't want to overcorrect. We don't want to overreact. We don't want to do nothing.
Well, I think that's what the podcast is really about, which is like, what do you do with the uncertainty? How do you do? I think indecision is the most common place parents are in. I think there are plenty of good ways to navigate it. It starts with just staying curious and not reactive, right? Asking your kids, tell me more about that, instead of correcting, instead of dismissing, tracking patterns over time. At the end of the day, safety is more important than privacy when it comes to the parental relationship. Check your kids' moods, behaviors, functioning, their thought process. Do they seem more helpless, more hopeless, more worthless, more powerless in their lives? Look at their functioning, not just their content. It's less about what they're saying and more about how it's affecting their lives. And make sure you consult people early, not late. If you're unsure, ask more questions. You don't need a crisis to get input. I think that I'm very lucky to work in a field of altruists. People get into the behavioral health, the mental health space because they want to help families. They want to help people. I can't think of a single person I know that works in the space that wouldn't be happy to have a consultative phone call with a family who just doesn't know what to do and doesn't know whether or not this is normal. And no one's going to over-pathologize. Everyone's just going to provide the best kind of advice and care and perspective they possibly can.
I'll speak a little bit from my own experience. I'm someone who, as a teen, struggled with depression and anxiety. And my parents would have never really, did they see it? Yes. And I think their first reaction and response was to try to explain it, to try to not justify it, but to understand it through all of these different lenses that had nothing to do with mental health. So it was, maybe I was overextended, or I remember feeling, I'll never forget this. I felt like I could not breathe. I felt like, that sense of like an elephant is sitting on my chest and I couldn't breathe, and this kept happening. And I went to my mom and she was like, oof, sounds like allergies. We're going to take you to an ear, nose, and throat specialist. Guess what? Turns out it was anxiety. I was having performance anxiety, and it would show up every time I had I forget what it was, a soccer tournament, probably when I was playing softball, because I was really bad at softball and I really didn't like it, but I was had to stick to my commitment. And so I think a lot of times this delay in seeking services is that parents might be looking for all of these other reasons or rationales for what is going on. And I think sometimes, right, it might come from, and I say this without judgment because I could see myself very easily taking the stance of oh, you're just being lazy. You don't want to do this, and so you're making excuses, and it's you're making excuses so then you can just lay in bed and doom scroll or play your games or whatever, right? And I think a lot of times parents, they are missing the underlying, what's really going on, and they're just kind of seeing the behavior and the outcome of the behavior, which is the kid gets to just check out and chill and not do their schoolwork or not have to do chores or whatever. When in reality, it might be there's some major depression going on here.
AJ is completely correct. It's about having open, non-judgmental conversations. It's about not assigning blame. So when someone's not performing, we don't necessarily have to consider it laziness. It could be a form of functional impairment driven by internalized, unseen psychiatric interference, right? And you have to be able to assess your child's functioning without letting ego, without letting frustration, without letting even kind of building resentment impact the clarity of your decision making. And that's, I think, where getting professional perspective. And I think that's where getting professional perspective, if those concerns persist from a pediatrician, from a therapist, from a neuropsychologist, can be invaluable.
And can I just drill in on the point that David made of please do not wait for your kid to be in crisis to seek help. Do not wait.
I think it's imperative that we practice intervention earlier and start having those harder conversations early and often. And they don't even have to be hard conversations. I think it's at some point we stray away from, I have a 3-year-old, and right now all I do, I play with my 3-year-old. We play all kinds of things. Mostly it has to do with dinosaurs and cars. I don't know what it is about 3-year-old boys and dinosaurs and cars, but at some point I feel like we start to stray away from that play aspect with our children where we're not entering into their world, and they stop inviting us into their world. And if we can try and keep that piece, when I ask the question of how do we stay connected, I think that's one way that we try to stay connected is through play. However that shows up, if that's in their video games, if that's in, whatever their areas of interest are, really tapping into that with them, and then identifying when something seems off, not dismissing that maybe gut feeling that we get, and listening to that and really exploring. So where do we start? Where do we go from there? Is it talking to the school? Is it talking to pediatrician? What is the first step? If we're seeing like, oh, my gut's off, there's something going on here, I'm concerned, I want to start the process of getting help or identifying what this is, where do we start? What's our first step? And I know it's not going to be the same answer for every scenario.
Oh, for sure. Well, I think that one, it's really important to always rule out a medical reason. I think that many times we learn that as clinicians when we're considering a diagnosis. It's one of the first things that we are thinking is there a medical reason that this person might be experiencing this? And when was the last time they had a physical? When was the last time, right? And so looking at those aspects. But I love the idea of looking to the school, looking in those environments where your teen, your loved one has some different exposures and other sense of other observations about them. Are other people in different environments seeing similar things to what you are seeing at home? That's really important to be able to gauge, I think, the pervasiveness of the whatever it is that's showing up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that families have to move from a place of emotion to information. I think it's completely normal to feel anxious in these situations. I think it's very important to rule out medical etiologies. Want to make sure that they're not really low in B12, but at the end of the day, parents have to ask themselves, what am I seeing? What is happening? What is it affecting? And that shift from reacting to observing gives much better information about what's really going on. And I have the good fortune of working in a field where we're always, someone's first step. We're consummate data collectors. As neuropsychologists, we are statisticians and diagnosticians. Again, for parents who exist in this ambiguous child rearing phase, these 18 years where they watch their child shift in and out of different developmental periods, some of which more sensitive than others, some of which have far more vulnerabilities than others. We have to ask themselves what is normal. And a lot of times we are able to answer that question for families. And then what they do with that information can be transformative. It can change the trajectory of their lives therapeutically, socially, academically, across contexts, across domains.
For the parent who's listening and thinking, I don't know if I'm overreacting or underreacting, what would you say to them?
If you have a gut sense that there needs to be a reaction, take some action. I wouldn't sit too long in the debate of the under or overreaction. I would trust your gut or the evidence, the observations.
Get a second opinion. You're trying to calibrate your response without any kind of clear baseline, and that's impossible, right? Everybody wants all the information so they can make an informed decision one way or the other, and they don't have all the information, and they're never going to have all the information, and that, again, it really, really sucks. But the best thing you can do is gather as much information as they can so they can feel as comfortable and as confident moving forward as possible.
And that second opinion doesn't necessarily have to be, right? Like I would consider residential, which is the wheelhouse that I am in. It doesn't necessarily have to be to that extent. And it also doesn't have to be to the extent of getting neuropsych testing. It could be reaching out to the psychologist at your school and putting something on their radar and asking them to pay a little bit of closer attention to your kid as they go through their day for the next couple of weeks. Are they notice anything? Reaching out to their teachers, their coaches, maybe I would say friends, parents, but sometimes that's really tricky. A lot of parents don't want to really talk about what's going on with their teen, which makes my heart hurt when we're not talking about what's going on. But I think that is just a normal part of where we're at right now, when we're talking about mental health. Folks don't really want to share it with their kids, friends, parents. But that there could also be some good information there.
Yeah, I think parents ideally need to move away from the question, am I overreacting or underreacting, and instead ask themselves, what is missing? Because I think that takes the pressure off of getting the reaction just right. Part of being a parent is not just being a behavioral guide and cheerleader. It's also about being a sleuth in a lot of ways, right? You need to be a detective in your kids' lives. And Unfortunately, no matter who you talk to, they're not going to be an expert in your children, but they might be an expert in child development. And you need to be able to really marry this expertise, your expertise with your family and their expertise in the field of psychology, the field of sociology, the field of development.
Thank you guys so much. This is such an important topic that we're covering today, talking about the experience that these kids are having, that the parents are having. So before we wrap, we end every episode with a short segment we call Field Notes, and it's where we ask each guest to step back and share one thing they're seeing in their work that they wish more parents understood. So, David, I'll ask you that question. From what you're seeing every day, what's one thing you wish parents understood more?
I wish that parents understood that you don't have to figure this out perfectly. I think you just have to stay engaged. You have to stay curious. You have to keep asking questions. You have to keep gathering more data. And I think that when something feels off, the goal certainly isn't to rush to a conclusion. It's to gather more information. You have to watch patterns. You have to ask questions. You have to get input wherever and whenever you can. And I think that clarity comes from understanding over time and not from reacting in that moment. I think that when you take a step back, things usually become a lot clearer.
I wish they understood how hungry their teens are for understanding and for help. This is a generation that they're not shying away from it. They want to understand themselves. I think that's why we see so much self-diagnosis. They deeply want to understand themselves, and they do want to be in relationship with their parents around it. They just don't want us to overreact. And they also don't want us to step in constantly from this fix-it mode. They want to be heard. They want to be understood. And they kind of want to be in partnership of also figuring it out. So I wish that parents knew that them stepping in, having those curious conversations, the difficult conversations, all of that, most teens, almost every teen that I talk to, wish that their parents were doing that more. Is it awkward? Yeah. Is it weird the first few times? Are we going to get it wrong? For sure. And they want us to at least try, and then try again, and then try again, without freaking out, without getting angry, without judging them, just coming in, listening, being curious, and again, helping them understand and helping them find the help because they want it.
Thank you so much, 𝐬𝐭 and David, for helping us navigate one of the hardest questions parents face. Is this a phase, or is this something more? If you're in that uncertain space right now, I hope this conversation gave you some clarity and maybe the confidence to take that next step, whatever that looks like for your family. If you found that this episode was helpful, please share it with another person who might also need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Robin Lovell. Thanks for listening to What Do We Do Now?